today, what you proposed inspired me to get busy with some of my work. And
Good.
so, I've done. I think I've put on my YouTube channel 4 chapters from my the begin. What the first two chapters deal with my decision to walk the Appalachian Trail,
Wow.
and plus I'm using my voice cloned to read it,
Wow. I
and
look
I'm
forward to hearing it.
finding it's going to be interesting how I discover exactly what is happening. On 11 labs, I get 500 characters per month that I can use.
Okay.
And that's about 50 hours of conversation.
Really?
I've
Wow.
used 320,000 right now, I think. I've got maybe a little more. Yeah, I got about 18,000 more uh, characters.
Now, when
So
you say character, what does that mean?
I think per letter,
Well, I
and
see.
yeah, per letter, and of course they doing different things will take away from your amount that you can use. So for example, what I do is I take my text that I have been writing for years and hone it, rewriting it, and but I'm never happy with anything I write. I'm a poor writer, and it sounds better audio than it does trying to read. But nonetheless, when I take my text that I've worked with for years, I put it into 11 labs. Then according to Grammarly, I still make the corrections Grammarly asks for. Then I generate my voice, which takes about probably less than 5 minutes. I download it, and I've got the audio in 5 minutes of
Oh,
whatever I've produced. And
fantastic.
most of the chapters are like 20 minutes, 20, 30 minutes, whatever that I've done thus far. And what I do is it's all audio, and I load it on my YouTube, and it's there for posterity primarily. It's for me to do and enjoy because I enjoy doing it, but it's also keeping the story. And I do a lot of silly things with my grandchildren to keep them engaged with me. So, I'm going to continue until I get all of this completed, which is going to take some time because all I've done thus far is to get on the trail for the first leg of my journey up to Trey Mountain. And
Well, I want to say just comment right there. Thank you for doing silly things with your grandchildren. That's so important
oh,
to
and
create positive energy in that relationship any way you can. And that's a wonderful thing as a grandpa you're doing. And that's smart. That is really smart.
well, I couldn't. My dream was to carry them on the trail, but we've walked many trails, but not the Appalachian Trail, because all of the years of their growth, we have hiked together at many places in this country and other places as well. So,
Now, when you say that word trail, from what I've learned from you and from others who have actually been on the Appalachian Trail, the idea of a trail in most people's mind is that it's beautifully laid out and beautifully groomed and everything is very smooth, but that's not necessarily the truth.
well, the Appalachian Trail, of course, it is a national park.
I
It's
see.
owned by the government. Now, there are a few places that private lands, it still crosses private land. Most of it, however, has been bought. and I'm trying to think. It's not that old. It seemed like in the 60s or 70s was when they began to do it. But
Ah,
it is marked by. It's usually about 3 feet wide, and every 100 yards there is a 3 by 6 white marker indicating that it is a trail. And along the trail there are many shelters built by usually the Appalachian people who voluntarily build the shelters. They keep it clean. Usually somebody has about 100 miles to maintain, and it's all
wow.
volunteers that do that.
Wow,
Uh,
that's a lot. That's a lot to
yeah.
maintain.
And
Wow.
but what most people don't realize is how much elevation up and down, as
Yes.
you described, like an accordion, going up and down the grooves of an accordion. And that's one of the difficulties. And what their idea is to keep it, not to make it an impossible thing to do, but an enjoyable thing to do.
Wonderful idea. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, and but unfortunately, I'm always anybody that went with me. I didn't make it easy. Unfortunately, so many with me never wanted to go back again.
Uh,
That shouldn't be the experience. The experience of walking ought to be fun.
so, like in a biblical reference, walking with JW, one would say, "For he is like a refiner's fire."
Right, right, exactly.
Okay, well, that's all right. Now, I have a brother-in-law who was a Navy basic underwater demolition school instructor, a BUDS instructor, and walking with Mike was not easy either. So,
Yeah.
but it toughened you up. I mean, you learned some good stuff that way.
Oh
You know,
yeah.
that's
Yeah.
but that the one of the things that I have heard as counsel in working with children and grandchildren is when you give a gift rather than giving money or something something like that, create an experience with them because the experience will last longer than the gift. And that idea of creating an experience is, I think, a valid idea to give as a gift, and
Well,
that's good.
uh,
And hiking must have been something wonderful. So,
of course, I'd heard of the Appalachian Trail, and in the first chapters that I put on the regarding it, it's the struggle of me deciding how to do this and why I decided to do it. And it's also a theological and a psychological, sociological admission on my part because I think that is a part of making a decision, and not everyone knows that about my decision. So I'm so close to going to glory that if anybody gets upset, they aren't going to be upset with me very long. Don't worry about that. But it's not any, unusual revelation. But it's just the same kind of struggles that all ministers have, and some advice from me on how to care for yourself as a minister.
well, I tell you what, if we're as long as you care to, I would be interested in hearing you compare and contrast the struggles with the joys. Talk about a struggle and then a joy that goes with that process.
Well, you're talking about my decision making, or
Just the whole thing about
well,
deciding to go.
it takes me 2 chapters before I even get on the trail.
Yeah,
And but what happened for me, and of course, anybody can, and I will post on this video and many others, my YouTube channel,
yeah.
and a person can listen to that. It's a lot better if they listen to it. But I came to a point in my ministry after 15 years and moving a church and completing a building and completing a sanctuary. I decided through all that struggle, there are always people who get their feathers ruffled, and I had a few people that had lost confidence in me, and it doesn't. My mother, I never had to be asked twice to leave a place. If somebody didn't care for me, they didn't have to ask me twice to leave. And
Now,
so,
I'm reflecting on that experience, and it's so common, and you articulated it well. But I'm thinking about that you and I both have been through a theological education, which took 3 or 4 graduate years, and I don't recall anywhere in my graduate work, and maybe in yours, you had more than that. You had more than basic seminary. You went ahead and did a doctor of ministry degree, but I don't remember any course or discussion where they talked about specifically building a building, ruffling feathers, ruffling feathers, and how to unruffle them, and when to say, as we say in the Air Force, when it's time to leave an airplane, handles raised, trigger squeeze, bail out, bail out, bail out, knowing when to bail out. So
yeah,
you,
my,
you
my,
learn that by experience. You don't learn it in the
yeah,
classroom, for sure.
I repeat it too often in the first chapter. How do you know when it's time to go? That's just the way I repeated over and again. I knew, and that's when I discussed it with Elaine about walking the trail, and she said, "Well, I think it's a good idea if you just take a hike." And so that's what I named the what I'm writing is, take a hike.
Yeah.
Uh, and what I came to was a time I was 54 at the time, probably at my prime in terms of abilities, and but I had nowhere to go. But I
Well,
needed to make a move.
it reminds me that as we think of the Gospels, and we think of the epistles, how many times the main characters in the story, both the Lord Jesus himself and the Apostle Paul and the apostles themselves, were told to take a hike. Somebody
Right.
told them to take a hike. That was
Yeah,
as a common theme in both the
right.
Gospels and the epistles.
I hadn't thought of it that way, but I think it's a good way to describe it.
Yeah.
Go over to the other side, take a hike, but this way, don't walk on water. Take the boat across,
And
and
then we get to Revelation, and God comes to earth and tells the bad guys to take a hike.
right,
Mine will take a hike in the end. It's the
right,
last book of the Bible. So take
yeah,
a hike, and
yeah.
some of you are going to go home and some of you are not. So, wow, that's
But
a wonderful thing. Take a hike. And when is
yeah.
it time to take a hike? Well, you'll know. You'll
Well,
know.
and of course, it's nothing great in terms of revelation, but it's just something that I explain. And then it's hard to, and I talk about the struggle of grief and separating with people from people you love.
Yes.
And I did and still do love the congregation I separated from. And they probably, none of them felt the agony that I felt in terms of that. And of course, the wonderful thing is that Willeen understood and supported me in what I did. But of course, there were rumors about, well, is this a midlife crisis? And I hoped that it was, because it would have meant I'm going to live to be 108 if it was a midlife crisis, because I was 54 at the time. But somebody asked Jody, said, are your parents having marital problems? She said, no more than usual.
Well, I reflect on something what you're talking reminds me of something my dad said when he had been in ministry since the 1940s, and he said, "Son, when I went into the ministry, it was considered, there was when you talk about the professions, you also talked about the clergy as a
Yeah,
professional position." He said, "When I went into the ministry, it was high prestige and low stress relatively, and now it's exactly the inverted."
yeah,
Low prestige and high stress.
yeah,
And I don't know if
right.
that would be an observation you would make too.
Yeah, well, Of course, I've always, I was like a fish in water when it came to pastoral ministry. I loved it, and still do. But of course, there are others that is not for them. I have a friend that just recently was called and asked to do a revival. It's in there without a pastor. He says, I'm not interested in being your pastor. I'm done with that. I'll preach for you, but I'm not going to be your pastor." Well, the opposite is for me. I mean, I just love the pastorate,
Yeah.
and all facets of it. I was not. I would not. I did not like that much doing weddings. Things it took too much time, and sometimes the counseling lasted longer than the marriage did, and things like that. So, but anyhow, that's how I began my journey. Is my struggles to get on the trail, and then there's so many fun things that I include for me that are great. And really, this is reliving 20 years ago, and really been good for me to do that.
Well, let me, if I may, peel back further than 20 years ago. Go back 70 years ago when you were a child. And
Hmm.
remember, if you can, one of the first hiking or outdoor experiences that you can recall that you delighted in.
Oh, Dennis, my every day prior to school, we were what we call outside children. Our
Hmm.
house was so small. Mother would say, "Now, when you finish your breakfast, put on your clothes and get out in the yard and play." Well, very often we would, as we grew a little older, I would leave home early in the morning to go fishing somewhere, either on a creek or at my grandfather's pond. And I was thinking the other day, I never thought about taking water with me. I never thought about taking food with me. And I would be gone all day long without the thought of eating. We probably generally found a creek to drink some water out of, but those were things we didn't think of. So, in when I did go to school during hunting season, we would come in the front door. We would go through and maybe get something to eat out the back door with the gun and stay till dark.
Hmm.
So I've always been an outside person. Hiking, though, was not something I ever did until I did the Appalachian Trail.
Interesting. But you
Yeah.
love the outdoors. You love being in nature.
Oh, still do.
You
Uh,
know, and I recall the same thing for me. I remember that my mom and dad were planting a church in the Pacific Northwest, and they drove. Now, this is Baptist life. They drove probably 150 miles with members of the church to an evening associational missions meeting. Okay, and they gave a prize for the people who came. They gave recognition to the people who drove the furthest to go to the
yeah.
association meeting. Now, and I was small. And this was the 1950s. And we drove up to near Mount Baker, Washington, which is way up in the mountains, and through the Olympic Forest from the
Mhm.
Tacoma area. And so there we were. And it was a group of, and now my folks were in their 30s, and they had a group of similar young people, most of them military, that
Mhm.
went with them to that association meeting, and they got recognized as the group that drove the furthest. But then it was nighttime, and you couldn't drive, they didn't want to drive back. So what we all did is we went to a parking lot, and I was probably 5 or 6 years old. We parked our cars, and we slept under the cars.
Is that right? Wow.
No tent, nothing else. We decided, well, that's that. We're going to kind of camp out here. And my mom and dad my mom had been in the army, so she knew about camping a bit.
Yeah.
So I remember it was going to rain, so we just crawled under the cars to stay dry. But that was being out in the beauty of the Pacific
Yeah.
Northwest, and just surrounded by the glory of God in nature is so refreshing. And the this, when at nighttime trees give off oxygen. Isn't that the way it works?
Yeah,
They
it's
create oxygen, so the air
right
is
every
clean,
day.
beautiful, and really great.
Yeah.
So wow.
Well, and never thought of safety or anything. Was no
No,
issue
no.
those days.
Oh no, and back in that day, I don't know if you ever did this, but when I'd ride with my mom and dad in say a mid 50s Ford or Plymouth or something, and I was in the back seat, I'd crawl up on the back shelf and sleep
Um,
under the
uh,
window.
well,
It was fun.
it's
To me,
quite
you'd be
different
arrested.
though. An only child and six children.
Yeah, yeah, it is quite different for the only child of six. And
Yeah,
Luann came from a family of eight, and you can imagine them in a
yeah,
57 DeSoto.
yeah.
Boy, you develop some interpersonal skills in that.
Absolutely,
Wow.
absolutely. But
Well, at different times, but wow. But the glory of being in God's creation and seeing the magnificence of what He has created is part of the experience. I'm sure that attracted you to the Appalachian Trail. Plus, it mostly a solitude experience, being alone in nature.
uh, that was not my intent. But I did spend a lot of time alone. I
Mhm.
was not. I had always wanted to do it, and it felt as I say in my writing, the most comfortable thing a preacher can do is to clothe his decision in a theological blanket and hide behind the pulpit and give a sermon.
Oh,
And that's
that's
what I
fine.
did.
Yeah, I like
And
that.
that's what I did. Whether driven by the Holy Spirit or cleverness of my mind, that was how I did it.
Yeah,
Of course, I masked a lots of feelings in doing that, and I've had years to work through my own grief. But that's the way I could handle it at the time. And because, again, people often don't understand the nature of a pastor or minister at any level is the amount of grief, not just for people who die, but for decisions that we make in terms of separation from the church.
yeah,
Uh, and uh, and we do have those, or at least my experience was very, I did as I continue to grieve in some ways, or I I want to know everybody for one thing, and you can't. And Then of course there's some people I know I would wish I had never met, and I'm sure there are people who feel the same about me.
I'm sure there are. Yeah, yeah.
But
And
nonetheless, yeah. But that my mother always talked about the Appalachian Trail, and one of the first people to walk the Appalachian Trail was a woman.
really,
Uh,
tell me
yeah,
about it.
oh yeah, yes. There. I see her a picture post quite often on Facebook. I forgotten. Granny seems to be her name. In her name, she uh, didn't carry a backpack or like anybody today would do. I think she walked in a dress and she ate most of the boiled eggs. She'd stop somewhere and get a dozen eggs and boil them and things like that. She learned how to, and this was prior to the clarity of the trail now. She did
Yeah,
it in much more difficult times than now. But the beauty of this area is that there are just so many wonderful trails in this area to walk. Of course, I'll not walk any of them, but people forget sometimes what I discovered in my the moment of trying to sort it all out was Russell Conwell's book, Acres of Diamonds, which he tells a
yes, yes,
story
sure.
and that you find the greatest things that you want in your own backyard.
Yeah, yeah,
And so what I did was I intended to do what they call a through hike, which is to the beginning and ending. And I got inspired to by a guy who was from Alabama, who was wrote a book called Blind Courage, Bill Irwin, and we actually I actually visited the northern end of the trail, Katahdin in Maine, prior to even stepping foot on the trail at Springer Mountain in Georgia.
Wow.
So I knew the end from the beginning,
Yeah.
but I did not make it. Actually I was home, I think, in 10 days at the beginning of the trail. I explained this in my writing because I had problems with my knees. I had tendonitis in my knees, and then I had heart trouble.
Oh,
I missed my sweetheart.
yeah,
Uh,
there you go. Yeah. Now,
and
was this
so
before the days of cell phones? Did you
I
have,
did have a cell phone,
oh, you
flip
did?
phone. I had a flip phone.
Were you in, were you where you could call, or were you very frequently in no reception areas?
Many times no reception.
Oh,
However,
yes, yeah, right.
I found at crucial times I did find a place to call, and it's amazing on the trail that I never met the person, but there was somebody walking the trail that would meet up with somebody, and for a fee would he had a way of getting you out, boosting your power to get wherever you wanted to on the phone.
Oh,
So, and of course, one of the wonderful things are the people that you meet. There's so
yeah.
many. Generally, about 3,000 people leave Springer Mountain every year, and
Wow.
10% of those complete the trail.
Which
So that
really
means,
is quite surprising, because that's quite a feat to
yeah,
complete the trail. That's really amazing.
but only 10% make it. And of course, I was one of the casualties. I did, and in my writing, I talk about how I handled that, much of which was embarrassment because I didn't thoroughly uh, think through what I was going to do. And so I had to work through the embarrassment of being home, not doing what I set out to do. I'd ended a 15-year pastorate and basically out of work, and so I had to work through all of that, and which opened the doors for me at a minimal amount of income to do some of the best work I ever did. And I cherish those years. It led me into inner church, inner city kind of ministry. It led me into cross cultural and racial kind of work. It carried me into new work. So it was all, for me, a good route. But what I did is the side trails. I walked many of the trails in Georgia just to recuperate. Walked into the Grand Canyon on one occasion for part of my recovery, and so I just got a lots of uh, benefit from my lack of planning.
Well, and that's one thing about the limitations of humanity. Our humanity is that we're not omniscient, and we often set out to do things that we have no idea what is really involved. And then we
Right.
just, but that's a learning process, and that's part of the joy of discovery too. And that is admitting our own humanity and say, well, if I'd known this, I might have made a different choice, but that's okay. Look at that I have really been recently impressed in my life about the sixth verse of the 23rd Psalm, where the business of I am
Mhm.
absolutely certain that goodness and mercy follows me every day of my life.
Yeah.
God's character is with me in all these things, no matter how painful or how sad or even hard work is involved in working through some stuff. Goodness and mercy is on its way. That He is doing that because we belong to Him.
Yeah.
And that's part of the joy of committing our lives to Christ, is knowing that that goodness and mercy is a part of his character pursuing us. And
Yeah.
what a wonderful thing that is. It lightens the burden a lot. We're not on our own, even though we may feel like it at times.
I know you've done a good deal of work in studying the Appalachian background and all. Sort of share some of the things you shared with me about that.
Well, I looked it up and I discovered that it was really, it comes from a group of indigenous tribes, an indigenous tribe called the Appalachi. We wouldn't call them Indians, so we call them, indigenous people that lived in the panhandle of Florida. And somewhere they got connected as they moved up into the tail end of the Appalachian Range, and they named the range after the Appalachi people. And it means the people on the other side of the river. The people on the other side, which, we recall that the word Hebrew means the people on the other side as well. And so it's kind of a commonality between the Hebrews and the Appalachi people. So you think about as you would come as a European immigrant and arrive on the North American continent, and then you come up against this great mountain range. And as I look at the mountains and think about them, what an overcoming magnificent obstacle, all those trees and all those up and downs, and even more so when you get to the Rocky Mountains further west.
Right.
What a barrier that was, and how those people stuck together. And I looked up some of the characteristics of Appalachian culture, and we talked about this, I think, before, and that is, one is that the indigenous people were very tribal. They loved their tribe. They loved one another. They stuck together. They had each other's back. And that was true of a lot of the people that settled in the mountains of the Appalachians. That's how you survived. It was a basic survival skill. And it was not an idiosyncratic culture. It was an other-centered culture. I'll give you the short off my back, and I know you'll do the same for me. It's other-centered, that exocentricity, not introcentric.
Right.
So it was that kind of, and you and I have experienced it in some of the pastoral situations we've been in, people that are used to very freely and openly sharing anything they have with one another. This is great Old Testament life, but it also is just a part of a basic part of the culture, don't you think?
But now, also, do you think when the Scots came, that the mountains were appealing to them? I would think.
Yes, it reminded them of Scotland. Sure did. Yeah, and Scotch Irish. A lot of, maybe your ancestors, I know mine are reputed to be Scotch Irish, and so that's the Scotch Irish people really loved is to remind them of the greenness. And we've had a lot of rain here in Alabama this year, and boy, it's green. And I remember the green of Ireland.
Yeah,
and the beauty of Scotland, as far north as it is. This reminded them of home, I think,
I think so too.
Yeah.
And rugged people. And frankly, the recent tragedies up in that area of the world with the flood last year,
yes,
and their recovery is an indication of that heritage, because they've not begged for help. They said, we are resilient people.
Yes.
And we'll make a comeback. And from the reports that I continue to see, they apparently are doing a great job of recovering from devastation beyond imagination, really.
Right. And one of the greatest risks, the Red Cross will tell you this, one of the greatest destroyers is water.
Yeah.
Flood waters can do a lot of damage to an area, and that's what happened up there. And I'm sure it surprised them terrifically, because they were not expecting a hurricane to come that far north and really clobber them the way they did. But boy, they did pull together. They sought out immediately to help one another, and that's really a part of the strength of that wonderful culture that has been influenced by the gospel, but it's also been influenced by the necessity that the environment creates. Now, there's a relationship between the land and the people, and that's undeniable. That forms their culture and shapes the culture. And I think the the ruggedness, there's bountiful beauty, but there's also bountiful challenges in learning to cope with that and establish a home there, whether it was the indigenous people or the later immigrants that came. Quite a history of really creativity, of self-reliance, of resilience, and all that sort of thing. Of course, remembering now, many of the folks that did the planted the church. We were in a church in Tennessee that had been there since 1796, when the beginning of the Christian faith came through that area, both by the Methodists and the Presbyterians, and later the Baptists and the Methodists came through that area, and in the Appalachian area, and that really, they had both. I attended two churches up there that dated from the 1790s, and there are records of deacons or elders in the Presbyterian church. One was Methodist, one was Presbyterian, who stood watch to prevent attack by the local Cherokee Indians during worship services.
Yeah.
They had one place was called Middle Settlements, and it was a fort of refuge where you could go that the locals built when you were under attack from the Cherokees. And of course, you were in their hunting area, and they didn't care for it much. And there was not just the natural things, there was the dealing with the indigenous people and getting that settled out and the ways they did it. And some of them were not the most gracious ways on both sides of that equation.
Right.
That was challenging, yeah.
Well, of course, we lived in the Calhoun, there near the nation of the Cherokee Nation's founding point, where actually the language of the Cherokee Indians was invented. The first Indian paper was printed there in at the New Echota, just north of Calhoun. And of course, all through there, you go to the Van Pelt House up in the Dalton areas, lots of the history. And of course, you got Cherokee, North Carolina, that perhaps you remember visiting as a child. We did, knew about it, but we took our children up there and still have some fun stories about going there. And I remember even the VSU I was in at West Georgia, they went up and helped to build a church in Cherokee, North Carolina. And
wow.
in my years. But there's so much about the music and everything that comes out of the mountains, the traditions of hog killing, moonshining, and all those things that I grew up knowing about, and really cherishing those kinds of things that came out of just the ingenuity of human beings to survive. As I say, what is it? Necessity is the mother of invention.
Yeah.
And there's so many places. There's you remember the Foxfire books?
Yes,
that
I
was
do.
written showing a lot of the North Georgia, Cherokee, all that stuff. It's just absolutely wonderful to read, and there's even a place you can visit there.
And the music was something that they created. They didn't have streaming services. They didn't have DVDs, and they didn't have music. So they invented their own music and became quite proficient at it,
Right.
night after night. And there are some marvelous musicians up there. In the Maryville, Tennessee area, they had a local abandoned elementary school that was turned over to the community, and every Friday night for about 6 or 8 months of the year, people would gather there to create musical experiences. So you'd have some great violinists, you'd have a hymn sing, you'd have people that just did some wonderful guitar work, and you would hear bluegrass music, and it was fantastic just to see people that had no formal music education per se, but were very skilled at what they did, and just absolutely, music was the language of emotion. It was the song of the soul, and it was just really wonderful to hear that. And that's
Well,
a great treasure of the Appalachian area is the music.
when you think of it, music generally comes out of a soul that has been stretched, like
Yes,
a
that's
string
well
on a
spoken.
guitar that's been stretched.
Yeah.
And you don't have to go far to Berry College and to the beginning of Berry College and
Yes.
the Possum Trot uh, schoolhouse that Martha Berry established for the children there, and her effort to bring education to that part of the world. Of course, that's further west and not as far north. But then you go all across that country. I don't know exactly where Fossil or Old Primitive Baptist kind of singing began, but that's another part of the musical uh,
Yes. Yes.
uh, number of musicals things that came up. And of course, they do it with just the vocal cords and not the strings on a guitar. They wouldn't have a string instrument in their building, but
Yeah.
yet the same mechanism that we speak with is used to make the music that the guitars make.
And quite intelligently too, because by using the solfege or the fa sol la, as they say it, knowing the position of those notes in the octave and in the harmonies, each person singing the solfege for their particular harmony, and then they would sing the words, kept them to, harmonically accurate. So what you'll hear in the Navajo Nation out in Arizona, you'll hear Navajos singing hymns in parallel fourths. They'll sing parallel fourths right straight through. So they're all they do is they stay a fourth apart in the four parts, and that is a very interesting sound. But in the Appalachian area, they would take the harmonies that might even be in a hymnal written by a musician, and they'll assign a solfege on, and they quite intelligently know exactly where to put it. So it's really quite a discipline and a beautiful sound. Really quite amazing. And the enthusiasm and the energy that they put into that performance and doing that together as a group is just quite something to see.
It
Quite something.
is.
Yeah.
It is. Of course, I do not have musical talent. I do have appreciation for music. I love to hear certain music. But then when you just think about most of the different genres of music, take, for instance, soul music, take the music out of the chanting of the Hebrew nation, uh, and take the music of Appalachian and on and on. Again, I still say that most of that music, wherever you find it, most of it came out of struggles, out of the African American background. Their
Yes.
music came looking for a hope beyond the struggles of slavery, looking for that other side of the river, something to give them some relief. So all of that is a big contributing factor to what we see in the Appalachian region.
We were recently studying the book of Obadiah, and Obadiah, God, through the prophet Obadiah, says that Gilead, there is, it's a wicked, wicked city. There is no balm in Gilead.
Right.
And then the spiritual is there is a balm in Gilead.
To soothe the sin sick soul.
Oh, yeah. And
Yeah.
it's the opposite. The text actually says, boy, one of the worst stinking towns in the world is Gilead. You don't want to, you think Opelika, Alabama's bad, hell on wheels. You go to Gilead, that's a bad place to be. There's no balm in Gilead, no healing there. And then the spiritual comes along. There is a balm in Gilead.
Absolutely.
To
Do you
heal the
remember
sick soul.
the Old Testament text, the Hebrews, when it says that they put their harps on the
Yes.
on the willow trees, and there was no song, and
Yeah.
said, "Why you asked us to sing a song when we don't have any reason to sing a song?"
Yeah. In a strange land. How
Yeah,
can we sing the songs of Zion in a strange land?
yeah,
Well, but the mastery of David and his life and his appreciation for music. But there just that one of the things that we have found in congregations, and particularly in the country, is a real appreciation and love for musical expression,
Yeah.
and especially some of the old hymns that they really love. And boy, I tell you, in life's trials, the they are you will connect with people that have had tremendous loss, and their music expresses that. I think your thing about it is like a string that's stretched. It certainly
Mhm.
is. And
Well,
yeah,
you think further in our age when dementia is rampant. What is the last thing that most dementia people lose? It,
musical. It is.
that's right. And I've heard this story again and again of people who could not give you their name, but yet they could sit down and play on a piano as they did years ago, or sing a song years ago.
My mother had Alzheimer's, very severe Alzheimer's, as bad as it gets, and she died of Alzheimer's. And in the last 8 years of her life, she did not recognize me. I was in the military, and I came home as her son. She had no idea. In fact, she would cry when she saw me because she didn't know who that strange man was. But I would immediately start out by saying, "When the trumpet of the Lord shall sound," and note for note, she would match.
Wow.
That was our refuge. We took shelter in the roll is called Up Yonder. And she had
Yeah.
a lovely soprano voice, and she could sing, and she knew it exactly. And her emotions were healed like that. And she sang with me, and we would take refuge in music that was still intact in her mind. And she couldn't express herself, but she could sing. And that was really amazing.
Well, again, that goes along with our interest in how the mind is put together and all of the dimensions that we're studying in every facet of science now. But that continues. Another thing is, I think that people respond good at that age to humor as well. Uh,
Yeah.
I think that's a part of. Uh, and I think when we meet people like that, we just need to, spend time with them and let them have the touch and the sound of another human being. And that's, God's given us those gifts. But the Appalachian story is a never-ending one. In terms, even in North Georgia now, you can find the uh, the modern world, but not far from the modern world, hidden in the mountains. You can find people who are very regressed, have not made much progress. I didn't know that until my experience of spending some time up there at the Credit Center and understanding that there were a lot of needs that were not seen on the highways, but hidden in
Yeah.
the mountains.
Yeah.
There was a lot.
There, and not far from the Blue Ridge Parkway, which is another gorgeous area to drive on, there is an arts center not far out of Asheville that is a lovely place of Appalachian art and seeing that. Oh, by the way, we're coming up on our 55th anniversary in August, and we've chosen to stay in the mountains in a VRBO that is not far from, I think is Delongia, is how do you say it?
The Lanaga.
Dahlonega, there you go. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah, we're not far from.
wonderful area. Yeah.
You're familiar with that, I think.
Oh, yeah. I'm very familiar with Dahlonega. You'll
Our,
love being there.
our daughter recommended it, said it was a kind of a nice town, and of course
Absolutely.
the mountains and the beauty of that area is really wonderful. So
Yeah.
we're looking forward to that.
The military college is there. There's a
Really?
military college there, and you ought to do a little planning for that because it was since you spent your years in the military, that would be something you would enjoy.
I
Uh,
would, yeah. I didn't know that. That's
yeah.
interesting. Huh.
Yeah. We had a friend that he was in charge of the ROTC there for a while.
Huh.
Now, I don't know how far it may have ventured from, the original purpose of being a military school to more of a just a regular uh, curriculum. I'm not sure. but there's so many wonderful shops there. And there's some excellent, there's the Smith House, I believe it's called the Smith House, just off the square there and all kind of shops. Oh, we spent quite a bit of time in that area, and it's been a while, but I envy you the trip. But congratulations on 55 years. That's great.
We're trying to catch up with you and Willeen, but you're now
Not gonna do
not going to do it. No, I don't think we will.
it.
Good for you. That's great. Well, what a joy to do that. And by the way, Dollywood was just named the premier entertainment place edging out California Disneyland this
Is
year.
that right?
The third year in a row, Dollywood's been picked as the number one place. And Dolly Parton is a really interesting person from the Appalachian that has done a lot for what she calls her people and
Yes.
the environment up there. And it's really, really quite wonderful to see what she's created there. She's an amazing person and her story is quite interesting too. But it's a classic Appalachian story, and that area is really quite amazing.
Well, and it's a wholesome area, family event. Willeen and I've been several times there and enjoyed the story of her beginning, told by some of her cousins in the theater there.
Wow.
And,
Yeah.
and we actually, the woman who was in charge of the event knew Dolly Parton personally, and she said she is as genuine as you'll find. And of course, she has this great work of books that she's given away, providing books for children. Another thing about the Credit Center, they had there the same thing, a bookmobile, where they went back into the mountains of North Georgia with that bookmobile and gave away books to children who didn't have regular access to that kind of thing. So there's so many wonderful stories about, to me, like even a song, the story behind the song is to me more precious than the song sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And of course, the way we connect to those songs. There's one song called "Lord, I'm Coming Home."
Yes.
The second verse of that song is the song my daddy would often repeat and weep because it says, "Lord, I'm wasting many precious years, but Lord, I'm coming home." And he would weep over the years that he wasted not doing what God intended him to do. And so I connect with songs that way, and I'm sure you do as well.
Yeah. We sang a song Sunday when I spoke at the assisted living center on the sixth verse, and it ends up and I shall dwell forever in the house of the Lord, and that you may recall a composer named John W. Peterson.
Oh yeah,
1960s. Well, I met him. In fact, I sang for him.
you?
Yeah, I got to meet him. He was in World War II. He flew a cargo plane across what they call the hump in China, delivering goods to troops in China, and very dangerous assignment. He did that and then became a composer, and he composed the home, "Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me," and he talks about how Jesus came and he was a pilgrim wandering in the night of sin. And then Jesus, the good shepherd, found me and carried me home. And that idea of being carried home is such a beautiful thing. And David wraps up his psalm with that, "And I shall dwell forever in the house of the Lord." And that we're on a journey that leads home, and that's something that I think very precious to the people of the Appalachian region and worldwide, that we all want to be able to finally go home and be at peace. And that's a wonderful thing.
Now out of the tradition of the Presbyterians, y'all, the clans and the colors as a tradition many of the churches still maintain, I think, every year, where they will display the colors and the family connections with those colors, which of course goes back all the way to Scotland and
Yeah,
the
yeah,
beginning of the church.
yeah, and that, yeah, the great symbolic things that anchor our lives.
Yeah,
The symbolism very powerful and a wonderful part of Appalachian culture too. And there is also a no nonsense, tell it like it is candor among Appalachian people,
yeah,
and
yeah.
that is quite interesting. So that's
Yeah,
another.
and I think we probably make more of it. The clannish nature.
Yeah,
If you don't, if someone didn't know you, you had to be very careful because you get to know them, but not the way you wanted to. And I've always said that in a culture like that, it's very difficult to get in. Once you're in, you're in. They have
yeah.
your back after you make that pierce that cultural shield or whatever.
Yeah, and that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. It was always a feeling in my early years that no matter where I went on the planet, if I could find Christians in a church, I knew I was
Yes.
home. I was home.
Yeah. Yeah. And you've made that your life. You lived everywhere.
I recall something today. I was thinking back, and I imagine you have some stories like this too. But I was thinking back to my seventh grade year, and we had a teacher who was a character. She was the wife of a physician, and she didn't need to work as a teacher, but she decided to teach junior high school. And she taught our seventh grade homeroom, and she was at Pearl Harbor when it was attacked, and she
Wow.
told stories about being there with her husband, who was an army doctor, and driving in to see him and seeing the machine gun fire come down on either side of the car, and that sort of thing. And she had difficulty controlling the children. And one day she just got fed up with it, our little home, getting it things wrapped up. And she left the class, she just shook her head and left the classroom, walked out on us, went out and sat on the curb. We could see her sitting on the curb outside the classroom window and lit up a cigarette. And I was the only guy in our class that went down and sat down beside her and said, "How you doing?" And she really appreciated that. But
I'm
I thought, well,
sure.
it was interesting that I felt the need to do that. But that, I think that's the Spirit of God working in us and calling us to ministry, that
Yeah.
people go to where the pain is. They taught us in the chaplaincy, go to the area of greatest spiritual need. And that's part of the heart of a pastor to do
Yeah.
that thing. And that's what a good shepherd does. That's what the good shepherd does for
Absolutely.
us.
And you
And
had that nature that early.
that early, yeah, I just realized that the Spirit of God, I think, brought that to my mind to say, this is who I made you to be all along. So just
Hmm.
be that. And you may not be what other people want you to be, but you just be who I made you to be, and that'll be fine.
That's great. That's great. Well, and then you lived there in Hawaii, where you close to that. I guess you did all the historical stuff there.
Yeah, in fact, all of the buildings on Hickam Air Force Base that were strafed and machine gunned still have. They never patched those bullet holes. They,
Wow.
they left them in the exterior of the building to remind everyone, if you don't be on guard, this can happen at any time. And that one interesting thing, they had a very tall water tower on Hickam Air Force Base. I mean, this thing was probably 100 feet tall, and it was concrete, and it was shaped like almost like a great obelisk, but it was a water tower.
Mhm.
And the Japanese were attacking Hickam Air Force Base. They did not attack that because they thought that was our God, and that was what we worshiped. And they didn't want to get the God of the Americans ticked off by destroying him. So they
How
didn't
about
attack the
that?
water tower, which they could have done and wiped out the water for the base, but they didn't do that. And they told later that we figured that was a memorial to your God, and we didn't want to mess that up. So that was kind of interesting. But
One thing, we visited there years ago and went through the all of the historical place there, but there's one thing that has haunted me, and you might be able to answer this for me. They were talking about on the Arizona as it went down that there was a writing on one of the walls of the ship. If you that they told us at the time when we went through what it was. And I think I'm right. It's when the Arizona went down, but a ship that was maybe it was one of the other ones, but they were trapped in there and died in there.
they
But
did.
they put some kind of message on it. But they told us, and I always tried to remember what that message was, and I never can remember it. It's just historical fact.
I will look it up. I'm sure we can find it. And it was a fact that that men did back in that day when the ship went down. They were sealed inside, and there was
Yes.
no way to get to them in time before their air ran out, and they died of they just didn't have enough air. And
Yeah.
so that's why the memorial is still there. That there are men that are buried inside that
Hmm.
even to this day. And I think it would be good to find that. But a good, it's
It
it's
may be another, it's related to the war. It may
yes,
not be the Arizona, but it could be another ship,
yeah,
another incident, but it was given in that lecture. And when we were there, there was still oil bubbling up
correct.
in
Yes,
that
even
ship.
all these years later, that still occurs. We live not far from that. We lived on Hickam and Pearl Harbor. Our kids had a paper route to the admirals' houses on Pearl Harbor. Every Sunday morning, we deliver the Sunday paper to the admirals, and that was
Wow.
the kids did that. But it was quite an experience to be there. And I
And
got to know the Marine commander and his wife, who were at the Marine Corps base right near there, and we became friends. And it was really a wonderful experience to be there.
now, as I understand it, there's a place you can go there as a military person and stay very reasonably. Is that right?
Not any, I don't think that exists anymore, but
Okay.
there was at one time. Yeah, that was true. There is a hotel called the Halikoa, which means House of the Warrior, that is on Waikiki Beach. That is it's comparable to staying at a commercial place, but anyway, it's a nice place to stay, and
Yeah.
it's a great place. It was a great treat to be stationed there, and I thank Jesus that He let me do that. But JW, I've got
Okay.
we have an HOA meeting I've got to go to, and I'll need to bail out here. But it sure
Good
is
enough.
be with
We,
you today, sir.
we continue the conversation. We went from Appalachia to Hawaii.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Well, you take care, and I'll talk with you later here.
Love you, brother. Take care. You
Love
too.
you too. Bye bye.